Hi, everyone. Today I want to tell you a story that starts in a glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline. I'm standing in front of a man I've never met before. His suit is impeccable, his tie loosened just enough to look casual but calculated. He doesn't look up when I enter, doesn't offer a handshake, doesn't even say hello. The first words out of his mouth? "You're overpaid for what you do." So before you listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. Now, let's ease into the story together. My name's Riley Moore, and at the time this all began, I was the director of human development at a firm called Dawson & Klein, a corporate consultancy firm that lived and died by its reputation. I'd been there for just under 2 decades, long enough to have weathered layoffs, recessions, mergers, acquisitions, and 4 different CEOs. I was what people politely called legacy personnel, which in plain English meant not flashy, not new, but irreplaceable, until someone decided otherwise. The man across from me was Gavin Stroud, the new CEO, freshly installed by a board that wanted agility and disruption, and all the other buzzwords consultants use when they want to bulldoze what works to make room for whatever's trendy. Gavin had a pedigree, tech startups, failed ventures, and a Rolodex full of venture capitalists who thought he walked on water. To me, though, he was a man in search of a problem to solve, and I had just become his latest project. "You've been here, 18 years?" he asked, finally glancing up from his laptop. 19 this July, I said, my voice calm, my hands folded neatly in my lap. He made a dry little noise that might have been a laugh. "Right. Legacy salary. We'll be adjusting that. 30% reduction, effective next cycle." He didn't look at me when he said it, just tapped a few keys and kept going. I didn't blink, I didn't argue, I didn't even frown. I simply nodded and said, "Understood." Because here's the thing no one tells you about being underestimated. It's powerful. You're free. And when you no longer owe anyone your loyalty, you gain clarity. That moment, right there in his office, wasn't the beginning of my end. It was the end of my restraint. I walked out without another word, stepped into the nearest restroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection. The fluorescent light hummed softly above me. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just stood there, steady and still. Then I smiled. Not the smile of someone defeated, but the quiet, knowing smile of someone who's been released. You see, Gavin made one critical error. He didn't see me, he didn't even try. To him, I wasn't a person, I was a spreadsheet entry, a budget line, a mouth to close. He assumed I wouldn't fight, that I'd grumble, maybe send an email, and eventually fade. He was wrong. I wasn't going to fight him, not in the way he expected. I wasn't going to complain to HR or write a dramatic resignation letter. I wasn't going to defend my value to someone who'd already decided I had none. Instead, I would do what women like me have done for decades in quiet offices and chaotic boardrooms. We adapt, and then we act. I knew this place better than he ever would. I knew where the information lived, who the silent allies were, and how the machine really ran. Because I was the one who kept it running while men like Gavin came and went, leaving chaos in their wake. Over the years, I'd stabilized teams, smoothed over legal risks, implemented compliance systems that had saved Dawson & Klein from no less than 3 lawsuits. I'd restructured internal culture without fanfare. I knew how to resolve conflict before it went nuclear, and more importantly, how to build systems that people didn't even realize they depended on until they failed. But Gavin didn't care. He didn't want experience. He wanted headlines. He wanted to be the guy who slashed the budget and optimized legacy departments. So, he came for me first. And in doing so, he gave me something far more valuable than a paycheck. He gave me permission to stop protecting a company that had stopped protecting me. After all, I was the backbone. And when you remove a spine, things collapse. What Gavin didn't know was that I'd already anticipated something like this. For years, I'd seen the writing on the wall, the slow erosion of respect for institutional knowledge, the obsession with youth over experience, the assumption that value lives in volume instead of depth. So I'd built contingencies, not for revenge, for preservation. Systems, protocols, redundancies, quiet threads of digital insurance woven into the fabric of our operations. Legal, ethical, invisible. And now I would begin pulling those threads. Not recklessly. Precisely. Because when a leader shows you they don't see you as human, your silence becomes your greatest strength. And my silence, it was about to get very, very loud. I didn't expect a parade, but I also didn't expect to be erased so quickly. It started the day after Gavin's little salary adjustment. I came back from lunch, same as I had for nearly 2 decades, and someone else was sitting at my desk. A young woman, early 20s, glossy hair, immaculate nails, arranging color-coded pens like she was preparing for a productivity influencer live stream. No nameplate, no announcement, just there. I stopped in my tracks. "Excuse me," I said, as politely as I could manage. "Can I help you?" She smiled up at me like I'd asked her to pass the salt. "Oh, didn't anyone tell you? I'm Harper. I'm the new executive assistant to Mr. Stroud. He asked that I sit closer to him." That desk, the one she was sitting at, that was mine. Was. She said it so casually, like I'd misplaced a coffee cup and not nearly 20 years of tenure and status. And just like that, I wasn't even part of the conversation. The decision had already been made. I packed up what little remained. No scene, no sigh, just quiet, practiced movements. I relocated to the auxiliary desk next to the supply closet. Yes, really. Where the copier coughed every 10 minutes, and the vent above my head made an anxious rattling sound that never quite stopped. Somehow, no one officially informed me about this change. It just happened. That's how it starts, by the way. Not with a pink slip, but with quiet reassignments, with shared glances in hallways, with invisible hands moving your name down the org chart until you're a ghost sitting in your own chair. Next came the calendar purges. Meetings I used to lead disappeared from my schedule. Strategic planning sessions were reassigned. Invitations stopped showing up in my inbox. My days, once packed with departmental decision-making, were now a carousel of minor admin tasks. Resetting passwords, processing leave requests, troubleshooting printer settings. And Harper? Harper had observation access to everything: payroll, compliance, contracts. She was given shadow access to our entire HR architecture, supposedly to learn the ropes. But what she was really doing was taking notes. Not the good kind, not the helpful kind. The kind of notes people take when they've been sent to report back to someone else. She started calling me Riles in front of the interns, like we were sorority sisters instead of 2 professionals who'd shared an office for less than 48 hours. I didn't correct her. I let it happen, because I wasn't there to win anymore. I was there to watch. You learn a lot when people think you've given up. I saw her take screenshots of reports she didn't understand. I saw the way she forwarded confidential documents to Gavin without reading them first. I saw the security flags she tripped without even knowing they existed. And I saw, most importantly, just how thin the foundation had become under this new regime. Because when you cut out legacy knowledge, what you're left with is guesswork. And Harper, she was guessing. A lot. Gavin thought cost-cutting meant control. But what he didn't realize was that every dollar he shaved from my paycheck came with a hidden price tag. Oversight, accuracy, institutional memory. I didn't retaliate, not then. I took notes. I began arriving 15 minutes early, stayed 20 minutes late, quietly audited permissions, downloaded backup copies of policies, created offline logs of access changes and communication patterns. I didn't break rules. I wrote most of them. I just ensured I had a record of what was happening, in real time. The irony, no one noticed. I'd been so thoroughly dismissed that my name didn't raise alarms. I was already halfway out the door in their eyes. So while they were busy managing optics, I was quietly reclaiming autonomy. That's the other part people forget. When you work behind the scenes long enough, you don't need spotlight to hold power. You just need timing, precision, and documentation. I watched Harper walk straight into compliance risks she didn't even see. I watched Gavin approve process changes that removed checks we'd spent years developing. They didn't know what they didn't know, and they weren't curious enough to ask. They weren't building a better system. They were cutting corners with a machete and calling it streamlining. And meanwhile, they were mocking me. I heard them once, in the elevator, They didn't know I was 2 feet behind. Gavin said something about dead weight dragging down salaries. Harper giggled. Don't worry, she'll be gone by the next quarter. Maybe they thought I'd cry. Maybe they thought I'd retire quietly, or spiral. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It lets you plan without interruption. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I went home that night, sat on my porch, sipped chamomile tea, and outlined exactly how this story would end. Not with drama. Not with a resignation email. But with silence. Silence that would echo through every system they thought they controlled. Because I wasn't just one person, I was the infrastructure. And they had no idea how much of it still ran through me. Let them underestimate me. Let them think they'd won. Because what they'd really done was invite the collapse. And I was just getting started. There's a quiet power in knowing you don't owe anyone your silence anymore. Not protection, not patience, and definitely not the benefit of the doubt. After Harper was installed in my old office and my responsibilities were trimmed down to paperwork-level grunt work, the logical choice would have been to resign. That's what they expected. That's what they wanted. Walk away, disappear, make space for their shiny new vision of the future. But I didn't resign. I stayed. I showed up each morning, smile in place, blouse pressed, planner open, like nothing had changed. I responded to every email, fulfilled every demeaning task with the kind of thoroughness they didn't deserve. I kept my head down, but not in surrender. I wasn't bowing out, I was laying ground. See, I had spent the last 19 years building systems, not just software or processes, but cultures, norms, unspoken channels of trust. It's easy to forget the architecture behind a building until the walls start cracking. I made it my mission to take inventory, not of files or folders, of power. Who had access to what? Who approved changes? Which logs captured activity? What was tied to my credentials? What wasn't? And more importantly, what would happen if I walked? You might think this part is where I became the saboteur in the story, but no. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing for accountability. Because what people like Gavin never understand is that people like me don't burn things down. We unplug them quietly and walk away while they trip over the wires. Let me explain. Years ago, after a disastrous leadership turnover nearly brought the company to its knees, I had developed something called the Continuity Contingency Protocol. It was our digital dead man switch, designed to protect the company in the event of catastrophic leadership collapse or ethical breach. It was discreet, legal, quietly buried in the architecture with board-level approval. One part technical, one part human. It required dual authentication to override, mine and one other trusted leader's. That trusted leader? Monica James, my IT counterpart and one of the sharpest minds I've ever worked with. She wasn't flashy either. She was a back-end wizard, brilliant at cybersecurity and meticulous in her protocols. Monica knew exactly what kind of game we were playing, even before I had to say a word. All it took was a brief encrypted message. Protocol B4, confirmed status. Her reply came within 3 minutes. Confirmed, quiet prep initiated, log wipes in process, say when. We didn't need meetings, didn't need backstories. Monica had watched the same slow-motion erosion. She'd seen Gavin's shortcuts, Harper's sloppy trails, the security flags, the rushed permissions. She understood in her bones what was about to happen. I wasn't building a plan, I was unlocking one that had been sealed for years. While Gavin hosted his rebranding town halls and Harper paraded through HR dashboards she didn't understand, I was quietly cloning the compliance logs, backing up the systems, encrypting archives, creating independent storage with time-stamped receipts. Not to destroy anything, but to prove everything. And let me be clear, every single move was legal. Every policy followed. Every backup within the scope of my authority. Because while Gavin played chess, I played protocol. It's easy to laugh off legacy employees until you realize we wrote the user manual, and you've been skipping pages. And through it all, I said nothing. I wore beige cardigans, took notes during meetings I wasn't supposed to be in. I even brought cupcakes on Harper's birthday. She called me a sweetheart in front of the interns. Bless her heart. Every time she handed Gavin another report she didn't vet, I made a silent note. Every time he made a sweeping change without audit review, I added another line to the contingency log. Let them run wild. Because the systems they thought they controlled were only running as smoothly as I let them. One evening, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the office with just the hum of the vending machine and the occasional pop of the heating vent. I pulled up the protocol interface on my secure laptop. There it was, my emergency handover system, a full restoration protocol with optional access freeze, employee data shielding, and system lockdown phased over 48 hours. It was elegant, quiet, precise, and completely outside of Gavin's line of sight. Activating it would be the digital equivalent of turning off the gravity, but only if absolutely necessary. I wasn't angry. I was ready. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every department being run into the ground because a CEO wanted a headline. Every person shoved aside for someone shinier. Every system held together by invisible labor, the kind that never gets applauded until it disappears. There's a kind of sacredness in work done well, when you've poured yourself into a thing for so long that it functions like a part of you. And when they try to cut you out of it, they don't just lose a person. They lose the design. They lose the reason it worked. I closed the laptop that night, knowing I wouldn't need to explain a thing when the time came. The cracks were already forming. And all I had to do was be there, steady, quiet, and ready to let them break. It was a rainy Tuesday, of course it was, when the final push came, the kind of day where the city feels heavy, like even the sky is tired. The streets below the office shimmered with that silvered reflection you only get after a long, reluctant storm. I remember noticing how quiet the elevator ride was. No small talk, no eye contact. Just that anxious, suspended silence people wear when something's coming, and no one wants to name it. The invite had come late the night before, a mandatory, all-hands meeting, no agenda, no subject line, just main conference room, 9 a.m. sharp. That's never good. When I stepped into the room, it was already half full. People sat stiffly, like they weren't sure whether to sip coffee or brace for impact. Gavin stood at the head of the table. Harper was next to him, holding a tablet like she'd been elected keeper of corporate wisdom. Gavin had that trademark consultant smile, practiced, strategic, a little too wide. The kind of smile that says, "This will hurt, but I'm going to call it alignment." He started with flattery, of course. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he said, pacing just slightly, like he was giving a TED Talk. "As many of you know, we've been conducting a top-down review of our internal operations." A few heads nodded, mine didn't. Gavin continued, "We're identifying roles that no longer align with our strategic vision, functions that, while appreciated in the past, may not reflect where Dawson and Klein is heading." There it was, corporate euthanasia served cold. He didn't say my name, he didn't have to. Every head turned toward me, like clockwork. "This will be Riley's final week with the company," he said. "We thank her for her years of dedication and wish her the best." Just like that. No handshake, no invitation to speak, not even a polite lie about pursuing new opportunities. I was dismissed, packaged up, and erased in front of a room I had once held together through restructures, legal crises, and 3 economic downturns. The silence was deafening. I looked around the table, at people I'd mentored, counseled through family emergencies, advocated for during layoffs, people who had cried in my office, celebrated in my office, built careers under my guidance. Not one of them met my eyes. Not because they didn't care, but because they did. And caring in a room like that? It's a liability. It's dangerous to grieve something when you're still clinging to your own seat. So I nodded once, stood up slowly, and said, "It's been a privilege." That was all. And I walked out, steady, dignified, my heels clicking softly across tile, like the closing notes of a song no one wanted to end. I didn't cry. Not in that moment, not in the lobby, not even as I pushed open the stairwell door and descended. One step at a time, like I was leaving a courtroom and not a career. But once I hit the landing between floors, somewhere between the past and whatever came next, I stopped, gripped the handrail, and the tears came. Not from rage, not from shock. From relief. 19 years of loyalty, erased in a 5-minute monologue. It was infuriating, but it was also freeing. Because now I didn't owe them anything. No more guarding systems, no more biting my tongue, no more shielding them from their own carelessness. They thought they'd cut me loose. What they didn't realize is that they'd just released me from every ounce of hesitation I still had. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, logged in from my personal server, and activated the final stage of the continuity contingency protocol. It was like flipping a switch on a machine I'd built years ago. Only this time, I wasn't doing it to save them. I was doing it to save the integrity of what I had created. The system was simple, elegant. It would begin by removing high-level admin access to critical HR databases unless 2 active users authenticated within 48 hours. One was supposed to be me. The other was a backup, a trusted IT executive who, by then, had also quietly left the company. Without that dual access, the systems would enter protection mode, not crash, not delete. Just lock. Soft, silent, total. Monica had already begun scrubbing metadata so the transfer wouldn't flag alerts. We weren't sabotaging, we were reclaiming. At the same time, I wrote a final memo. Short, legal, unshakably clean. Effective immediately, I withdraw all personal liabilities from system structures, frameworks, and contracts built under my authority. Access privileges granted under my credentials are hereby terminated unless renewed by mutual written agreement. Riley Moore, and then, for the last time, I logged out. 3 days later, the unraveling began. At first, it was a trickle, a message from a former colleague. Hey, weird question. Do you know why payroll access is locked? Then another. We can't run compliance reports. Did you ever password protect the audits? And then it hit like a wave. Payroll failed to process. Onboarding forms glitched. Benefits renewals froze in limbo. The HR portal redirected to a 403 access denied screen. Every attempt to override the system bounced back with incomplete credentials. They scrambled. Reset passwords, blamed bugs, called IT contractors. But the system wasn't broken. It just wasn't theirs anymore. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. I didn't hack anything. I didn't erase a single file. I simply removed myself. And when the scaffolding disappeared, the building trembled. Because Gavin had been so obsessed with tearing me down, he never stopped to ask what would happen if I walked away clean. Now he was about to find out. It's fascinating how quickly a machine collapses when you remove a single cog, especially the one they forgot was holding the entire engine together. By the end of that same week, Dawson & Klein was in full-blown meltdown. Payroll hadn't just stalled, it failed altogether. Employees started posting about missing direct deposits. Internal Slack threads went from, "Has anyone else not gotten paid?" to, "What the hell is going on?" in less than 24 hours. HR's internal platform redirected to an error page. Benefit elections were stuck in pending limbo, and no one could approve leave requests or process new hires. All the while, I sat in the warmth of my sunlit living room, sipping a cup of lavender tea and watching the chaos unfold through forwarded messages and social media breadcrumbs. The text came first, then emails, then a call from a number I didn't recognize, probably some mid-level manager being asked to patch things up with me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The unraveling had already begun, and there was no stitching it back together without the needle. People love to say, "No one is irreplaceable." That's usually said by people who've never built anything from scratch. What they don't realize is that systems have memory. Not just technical memory, but a rhythm, a flow. And when you disrupt that flow without understanding its current, you capsize the whole boat. Gavin kept pushing for solutions, escalating support tickets, scheduling emergency IT scrums, drafting half-literate memos to calm the staff. But the truth was simple. Everything still ran on protocols I had implemented. And those protocols were now locked behind dual authentication no one else possessed. Because when I said I had built the backbone, I meant it literally. I had architected their compliance infrastructure, designed their onboarding pipeline, created their retention metrics from scratch. and Gavin had cut me loose without so much as asking how any of it worked. At some point, the board must have realized something was deeply wrong, not just with the systems, but with Gavin himself. The smooth-talking visionary had no answers, no fixes, and, perhaps most unforgivably, no humility. By Monday morning, 10 employees had resigned. Quietly, strategically, no long emails, no drama. Just polished letters of departure, dropped like feathers. Each one, someone I had mentored. A department head, 2 senior specialists, an analytics lead, people with 10 years under their belt, people with options. And where did they go? The same place I had gone. You see, several months before Gavin had even arrived, I'd been quietly approached by a firm called Graybridge & Co., a mid-sized consultancy that was slowly carving out a name for itself. They'd been watching me, my work, my leadership style, my retention success rates, and had offered me a consulting position to help build out their people-first transformation model. At the time, I'd said no, out of loyalty. That loyalty was now dead. Gavin had murdered it, smiling all the while. So I called Graybridge back. Not only did I accept the offer, I brought with me everything Gavin had discarded: the blueprints, the metrics, the strategy maps, and most importantly, the people, the talent he never bothered to see. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a rebirth. At Graybridge, I was given full autonomy. No gimmicks, no egos, just quiet leadership and mutual respect. And as Dawson and Klein flailed, rushing to hire contractors, fumbling through audits, losing client confidence, Graybridge was ready. Fully staffed. System secure. Calm. That's when the final twist came. Graybridge acquired Dawson & Klein's underperforming R&D division. It was sold in the press as portfolio synergy, some nice tidy headline that wouldn't rattle investors. But inside the company, behind closed doors, everyone knew exactly what it was. A lifeline. A white flag disguised as a handshake. And guess who was placed in charge of the integration? Me. 3 weeks after Gavin fired me, I walked into a sleek glass conference room, portfolio in hand, and sat at the head of a long table where Gavin was now required to attend. He was already seated when I entered. He looked up, and for a second, he didn't recognize me. Then he did. The blood drained from his face. His mouth opened slightly, like he was going to speak, but nothing came out. I smiled, not cruelly, not smugly, just measured. "Welcome to our transition alignment session, Mr. Stroud," I said, extending my hand. "I trust you've reviewed the pre-read packet." He blinked, nodded, didn't shake my hand. It was perfect. Harper wasn't there. Word had it she'd been let go after a compliance breach involving unauthorized access to personnel files. Some mishandled data. Classic. The irony was almost too neat. Gavin, the man who cut my salary and declared me outdated, was now sitting across from me as I led the integration of his former company's assets into mine. He wasn't even in charge of the meeting. He wasn't even a decision maker. He was listed as a transition advisor, which in our world meant sit quietly, look helpful, don't touch anything important. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My presence was enough. This wasn't revenge. It was symmetry. Because when you erase someone without understanding what they built, you don't just lose an employee, you lose the entire framework. And when you replace legacy with vanity, you may just find yourself living their life. Only it's not the version you imagined. It's the part where no one listens when you speak, where your name is still on the door, but the door doesn't open to anything that matters. And that's where Gavin found himself. Meanwhile, I did what I had always done. Led. Quietly, deliberately, successfully. 3 weeks? That's how long it took to do what most firms stretch across quarters. 3 weeks from the day I re-entered that boardroom, no title, no fanfare, just purpose, to the day the full integration of Dawson & Klein's R&D division into Graybridge was finalized. No missteps, no delays, no chaos. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Gavin. While I walked into rooms with quiet authority, he sat at the perimeter like a ghost in a suit, clutching a legal pad he never wrote on. He came late, left early, said little, offered nothing. And no one cared. Because in that short window of time, it had become clear to everyone that I hadn't been excess weight. I had been the blueprint. Graybridge was thriving, not just operationally, but culturally. People felt safe again, seen. There was laughter in the corridors, brainstorming in the lounges, and for the first time in ages, people weren't just surviving their workday, they were engaging with it. I wasn't rebuilding. I was rebirthing. And I didn't do it alone. I brought over the quiet forces that had once held Dawson and Klein together, the thinkers, the implementers, the mentors. People who had been dismissed by Gavin's regime because they weren't flashy or loud or data sexy. But now, they were stars. Graybridge didn't need saviors, it needed caretakers. I gave them a culture worth keeping. Meanwhile, Gavin floundered in the background. He still had the title of advisor, but everyone knew it was performative. The only thing he advised on was the location of the coffee machine. The man who once declared me overpaid now stumbled through meetings, barely making eye contact, offering weak recycled phrases like iterative realignment and scaling forward momentum, as if word clouds could fix a broken structure. His decline wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, dignity, draining like a slow leak. One afternoon, I was walking past the shared kitchen on Graybridge's second floor, and there he was, alone, staring at the coffee machine, hand frozen above the buttons like he'd forgotten why he came. He looked small, not physically, but something in his posture, in the way his shoulders curved inward, like he was trying to fold into the furniture. His suit hung a little looser, his energy deflated. He turned when he heard me walk by. "Riley," he said, "just my name, nothing else." I paused. "Yes? Can we talk?" His voice was low, not commanding, almost tentative. I tilted my head. "Of course." We stepped into a side office, neutral ground, no windows, no audience, just a small round table and 2 chairs. He didn't sit. He leaned forward, hands braced on the tabletop, trying to find something to anchor himself to. "I didn't see it," he said quietly, "what you were doing, what you were holding together." I said nothing. "I thought you were just legacy weight, a name on a spreadsheet." Still, I waited. "I didn't know everything would fall apart," he admitted. My voice was even. "But you didn't ask, did you?" He looked down at the floor like a scolded child. "I'm sorry," he said. And here's the thing, he meant it. I could hear it in his voice, see it in his eyes. He was a man who had finally seen the consequences of his own arrogance. But that didn't change the outcome. Because apologies don't undo harm. They acknowledge it, that's all. I nodded once. "Thank you," I said, and we both knew it was over. He left the room first. That evening, I received a quiet message from Graybridge's board. Gavin would be transitioning out of his role entirely. The official language, voluntary resignation. The truth, he had been phased out. He wasn't fired, he was erased. Slowly, precisely, the same way he had once tried to erase me. The kicker? He was offered a redeployment opportunity, a junior advisory role in one of Graybridge's satellite offices. Phoenix. No team, no assistant, no boardroom. Just a nameplate. And a long list of regrets. I heard he accepted the role, took the flight, moved into a beige condo near the industrial park, and that was that. I never heard from him again. But this story was never really about Gavin. It was about every woman who's ever been told she's too quiet to lead, too expensive to keep, too seasoned to innovate. It was about every person who's ever been dismissed because they made things work without demanding applause. It was about stability and how it's mistaken for stagnancy, when really it's the most undervalued form of leadership. In the months that followed, I began something new. I didn't just lead teams. I began mentoring. Every Thursday afternoon, I opened up my calendar for something I called office hours. Not for the executives, not for the stars, but for the overlooked. Interns, assistants, mothers returning to the workforce, professionals in their 40s who had no idea what came next. We talked about confidence, boundaries, value, visibility. I listened more than I spoke. Because I remember what it was like to be unseen. And I would never let anyone under my leadership feel that way again. I launched a leadership cohort for women over 40. I called it Second Bloom, a space where experience wasn't hidden but celebrated. We talked about starting over, not from scratch, but from wisdom. We talked about walking into rooms not to prove we belong, but to decide what kind of room it should be in the first place. And the most incredible part? I wasn't doing it out of revenge. I was doing it out of hope. Because once you've reclaimed your voice, once you've built something new from the pieces they tried to discard, you realize the point was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving someone else right. The ones who believed in you quietly. The ones who watched, learned, followed. Now they were rising too. And I got to be part of that. There's something strangely full circle about standing in a room you were once dismissed from. Not as a guest, not as an employee, but as the one holding the pen, shaping the agenda, deciding what stays and what goes. That was me, months later, as I watched Graybridge flourish from the inside. We had completed our full integration of the R&D division ahead of schedule. Employee retention was no longer a crisis. It was a strength. Cross-functional teams that once hesitated to even share lunch were now collaborating daily. Morale was high, but not manic. It was grounded, stable, quietly energized. People weren't overworked. They were empowered. The work was still demanding, but the difference was people finally believed in the why behind it. And that made all the difference. One afternoon, I was walking through a second-floor hallway, a simple corridor with soft lighting and glass windows overlooking the courtyard below, when I saw him again. Gavin. He was standing in the break room, back slightly hunched, watching the coffee drip with the kind of blank expression you see in people who've forgotten where they were headed. He turned when he saw me. "Riley," he said, "just my name again, like before." But this time, there was no request. No, "Can we talk?" No apology waiting in the wings. Just that same look of someone who finally understood the cost of what he'd done. We nodded at each other, that was all. He picked up his coffee, walked past me down the hall, and disappeared through the security doors. I haven't seen him since. That moment wasn't a victory lap. It wasn't even bittersweet. It was still, like the final page of a chapter I had already read in a dream, one where I didn't need closure because I had already moved forward. The real story, it turned out, wasn't about Gavin. It was about what came after him. Because what Graybridge had allowed me to do, what so many other firms never dare to prioritize, was build something lasting, not flashy, not viral, just human. I'd learned a lot in those early weeks after being pushed out of Dawson and Klein, about silence, about strength, about the difference between having a seat at the table and being the one who built the damn table. And most importantly, I learned this. You don't need to destroy anything to rebuild your worth. You just need to step away and let gravity take care of the rest. Because when systems are propped up by arrogance and ego, they collapse under their own weight. All I did was stop holding it up. And now I'm holding up something else entirely. I still run office hours every Thursday. Last week, a woman in her 50s came to me, smart, capable, overlooked for years. I thought I was too late to start over, she said. Too invisible. I handed her a notebook. You're not invisible, I told her. You're just surrounded by people who've been trained not to see clearly. She cried. Then she smiled. And she stayed. That same day, a young intern pitched a bold new approach to our employee onboarding. I let her lead a pilot program. It worked better than anything we'd tried in 5 years. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do as a leader is not have all the answers. It's to see people, to invite them forward, to step aside and let the next great thing grow. The culture at Graybridge didn't become exceptional overnight. It became exceptional because it was nurtured, because the people behind it were finally given space, not just to survive, but to be seen. I mentor more now than I ever did before. Not just high-potential hires, but the quiet ones, the women who return from caregiving breaks and think they've lost their edge, the second career professionals, the ones who've been told not now too many times. They're not starting over. They're stepping in, and I get to be the one who clears the way. Last week, a young analyst left a handwritten note on my desk, just one sentence. Thank you for showing me that quiet doesn't mean powerless. I sat there holding that note, tears in my eyes, because that's what it was always about. Not revenge, not ego, not a salary line item. It was about making space. For the people who come next. For the people we once were. For the legacy that outlasts us. And as for Gavin, last I heard, he'd taken the position in Phoenix. A small field office, no team, no spotlight, no future at the top. Just a desk, a title, and a long list of regrets. But maybe that's where he was meant to be. Some people have to live the consequence before they learn the lesson. And me? I didn't just survive. I transcended. Now, when I walk into a room, I don't carry fear. I carry presence. Because presence is earned, not through noise, but through knowing exactly who you are when the silence falls. So, to everyone listening, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, downsized, or told you're too much, or too late, or too old to matter, here's your reminder. You are not a line item. You are the legacy. And they can't erase what you've already made real. Thanks for staying with me through this story. If it moved you, pass it on to someone else who might need to hear it today. Together, we build a legacy they can't erase.